have never quite gotten the hang of washing feet. Unlike presiding at baptism or communion, where I got lots of hands-on experience in seminary, no one taught me how to wash feet until Deacon Allison gave me a tutoring lesson a couple of years ago. You know, in the seminary, anytime we undertook this ritual, we would just walk through this like shallow wading pool that was our baptismal font. And the deacons and the deacon candidates would kind of, give us a hand as we waded down into a pool and a stabilizing hand as we came out. And there'd be a handful of chairs that they'd walk us over and they'd dry their feet. But there was no balancing and pouring, and it was all tidy and orderly and meaningful. Foot washing, when I did it or planned it, it never really looked like that. In the past, I even lacked the proper tools. My very first Maundy Thursday as a pastor, I washed feet in a shallow, sterilite underbed container with a Kool-Aid pitcher and the kind of faded terry cloth towels that seem to spill out of church kitchens everywhere. Though there was a particular holiness about that moment, that first Maundy Thursday for me, a very, very new pastor doing something that was very, very new in that community and worried that no one would come forward at all. And then the 90-year-old matriarch made her way up front. Maybe at least a little bit because she felt bad for me. And I've never been happier to be pitied. But of course, the real lesson that it was never about the details of the ritual. It was always about being vulnerable and doing it together. Jesus' washing is risky. This story, the one of Jesus washing his disciples' feet, it's only recorded in John's gospel. Even the word that he uses for washing is pretty much only in his gospel out of the entire Bible. And really, except for some scenes with John the Baptist in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John is the only gospel that even talks about water. Water changed into wine, being born of water and spirit, streams of living water. And near the center of John's gospel, he actually uses this word for washing again when the gospel tells of a man who was born blind being told to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And the washing is healing, but unfortunately the story doesn't end there. Instead, the man and his parents are extensively questioned and eventually thrown out of their religious community. It turns out this washing is no small thing in this gospel. It's precarious and vulnerable. So it's taken me a long time to learn how to wash feet properly, and it still isn't something I'd list on my resume. But I did learn how to give a bath in a bed. Talk about vulnerable. And the person who trained me was pretty perfunctory about it, which in retrospect is horrifying, because the real live person in the bed got to have their moment of ultimate humility be also a teaching moment for an 18-year-old who hadn't even graduated high school yet. But then one day, the nurse that I was assigned to work with was my mom. And she showed me how to carefully position the sheets to keep the person warm and covered. And she showed me how to speak softly but not childishly, and to explain carefully what I was doing, and to use their name. And she showed me how to meet humiliation with humility and to treat someone with dignity. And that is, I think, what we hope for in this ritual tonight. Someone once wrote C.S. Lewis and said, I know I'm supposed to love my neighbor, but what if I don't? And C.S. Lewis wrote back a single word reply: pretend. And I think that's really great advice, right? Fake it till you make it and all that. But we tend to pretend that is what this ritual is all about, pretending. That for a moment, the powerful might actually stoop down and learn something and make the world a little bit better. That enemies might come together in this ritual, abuser and victim, boss and worker, master and slave. That having experienced this act, we might seek reconciliation. But I don't want us to mistake this, that Jesus didn't say to his disciples, I want you to make a hierarchy and then reconcile it with everything I've taught you by occasionally having the bigwigs participate in a cheesy little ritual that makes everyone uncomfortable, and then they go back to being bigwigs. He told them all, Judas, Peter, Thomas, and all the rest, before they became betrayers and deniers and doubters and deserters, he told them all to wash each other's feet. This isn't really about the high becoming low, though that is what Jesus did, and that is what does sometimes happen. But this is a ritual of reconciliation because before the disciples were scattered, Jesus told them to return to one another, to belong to one another, and meet humiliation with humility. A lot of folks avoid church on this day, and they avoid coming forward to be washed. And I get that. Feet are weird and gross sometimes. That's why we've added a hand wash station. But the reality is that this ritual isn't vulnerable, humble, and risky, and beautiful, and maybe even sometimes holy because it involves feet and a person in a subservient position. It's vulnerable and humble and risky and beautiful and maybe even holy because when was the last time you allowed someone to care for you, beloved? And how can you care for others if it has been so long since you have felt cared for yourself? May this ritual of care and vulnerability and solidarity become our norm and practice and pattern for our lives. Let us love one another, and let us restore dignity, not through humiliation, but through humility and tender care.